So I have to be honest with you, I'm nervous tonight because I'm so stinking excited about what I'm going to share. It's one of those things where man, if we get this, I just feel like this is a God thing. I just want to scream it out. You probably don't want me to though, because I have a loud voice. So, we're going to be kind of brief, which means absolutely nothing when I say that, right? But we're going to get back to singing. We're going to do some more singing when I'm done. I just want to share a few things, just going right along with kind of all of that Good Friday is, and we're gonna kind of fly over real quickly all the things that kind of happened between Passover that week, that whole thing between the Last Supper and the crucifixion. We're going to kind of fly over that, and we're going to zoom in on one particular part of that story that I think is very powerful, that we often just run right over and we miss, and something I've been thinking a lot about lately. So that's what we're going to do tonight. First, I want to tell you a quick story, and I want you to think about a couple things. Have you ever, just barely cheated death? Have you ever had something happen to you where it just rattled you because there was this sense of man, that was a close call and I almost bit it. I almost just ate it right there and I would have been done for. Have you ever been there? I've totally been there. There's a lot of heads shaking. Yes, that's good. I'm glad that you were shaking your head. Yes. I was about 2 weeks ago. It was a Thursday night and we had a board meeting here and it was a super nice night out. It was like 70, 75 degrees. And so I decided to take my motorcycle and ride my motorcycle into the church for that meeting. And it was before the time change, so it was still a little dark, or it was already a little dark, I should say. And I'm driving down Downsville Pike, and if you ride a motorcycle, you kind of train yourself, especially at night, to look to the edges of the road for little glowing beady eyes, right? You totally do. The whole time, you're just looking for little beady eyes. And so I'm driving down Downsville Pike, and there's traffic coming at me. It's no big deal, but there's a little bit of a glare on your goggles because of that. And so I'm looking up, and okay, no beady eyes, drive along, no beady eyes, look up. And suddenly I look up, and I'm going about 55 miles an hour, and that's got to be the speed limit, right? Let's pretend it is. And so I'm going about 55 miles an hour, and I'm a little bit to the right of the lane I'm in, which I was in the correct lane, And I'm riding along, and about 15 feet in front of me, there's a cow. I've come to find out that it was a heifer. There's a difference between a calf, a cow, and a heifer. Northern Virginia boys don't know that, but apparently there's a difference. And this one was, I think, a heifer. It was about this high. Its back was about this high. Its head was, probably like this. And I'm riding along, and I look up, and there it is, the silhouette from one of the headlights coming at me, broadside, completely square in the middle of the lane. And I didn't have time to even touch my brake or to swerve, and I'm going towards it, and I yelled something. I don't know what it was. It was probably just, like some little girl, and I'm driving along. I'm a little nervous actually telling you this story. So I was riding along, and I didn't have time to hit my brake or to swerve. When I ride my leg, I'm gonna look really stupid right here, so just go with me. My legs kind of sit like this, right? Because it sits out like that. And so all I had time to do was I threw my left leg over top of the tank, and I closed my eyes and went like that, as if it's gonna matter. I went like that, and I peeked out of my left eye, and my heel kicked this cow right on that big bone, right? Going 55 miles an hour, just wham! And the bike wobbled a little bit, and I kind of regained control. My sister is over here, and she is very terrified right now. And she's like, I told you so. And it wobbled, and I kind of regained control. And I went to put my foot back on the peg, and the peg is only this, it's about like this, it just comes out from the bottom, and the peg wasn't there. because it had hit the cow's foot. That's how close I came to it. And so I had to push it down with my foot, and I put it on there. And I'm driving along, and I'm just like, holy cow. And I that was so bad. And I'm driving along, and so I pull over on the side of Downsville Pike. It took me a minute. It took me, went a good half a mile, I think, and I pulled over, and I stopped, and I was just like, is everything still here? I cannot believe that happened, and I was rattled. I was like super shaken, rattled, and I'm just sitting there thinking, what in the world was that? Like, what just happened? Is that real? Is that, and there's this mixture of emotions, and I still kind of feel it when I think about it a little bit of fear and relief, kind of all mixed in to one. Right, this just fear and relief and a little bit of confusion and like, what does this mean? Why did that happen? 8 inches over, and I would have been airborne before I even knew what happened, and it would have been really bad. And so I just had all these emotions like, man, fear and relief all wound up, and just this feeling of that was so close. That was so close. And I turned around to go back, and there was nothing there. If I had hit that cow, we'd have had steak at my funeral. I know that. That's all I really know. But man, that was scary. It was so, so scary. And so if you've ever been in a spot like that, maybe it wasn't a cow trying to kill you on Downsville Pike, but if you've ever been in a spot where man, it was you just feel like that was such a close call, right? You just narrowly escaped death. If you've ever felt that way, I want you to just think about that as we continue, as we kind of dive into what we're going to look at right now, just that feeling. Just hold on to that in the back of your head, right? As we go through this, it's going to come back around at the end. And man, I'm a little nervous now because I'm reliving that whole thing in my head. So we're going to look at a story that I think is very familiar to us. Sometimes it's too familiar, and what I mean by that is it's so familiar that we just glance over it and we look at it and we don't even think, right? We just, oh yeah, I know this story, and it's kind of like our favorite movie, right? That's just on in the background and we're not paying attention to. We're going to do that, and hopefully we can pull some things out of that are a little bit different. And what we're going to look at is Matthew chapter 27. You can go there if you want to. That's going to be where we're mainly at, but I want to set it up a little bit, kind of give us a background as to what's going on in Matthew 27. And we're going to start at what we call the Last Supper. At the time, they didn't call it that. They didn't know it would be that, right? It was just another Passover in their minds. And this is starting in Matthew 26, or in Matthew 26. And if you have a Bible, you're welcome to go to it. If not, I'm gonna read it, and you can just kind of listen in. It says, "Now as they were eating, Jesus took the bread, and after blessing it, broke it and gave it to the disciples and said, 'Take and eat, this is my body.' And then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, 'Drink of it, all of you, for this is my blood. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. And I will tell you, I will not drink again of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom.'" So they're just doing the Passover meal, right? And they'd probably done this 2 other times together as a group. No doubt all of them grew up with it, and they'd done it however many times however old they were. They'd been doing this their whole life. And it was given by God way, way back in the Old Testament, right? At Passover. And the whole thing was designed to point to this particular Passover. And they didn't even know that yet. It was probably 1800-ish years before. And it was all designed to point to that particular day. And when they would do the Passover, there'd be all these elements, all these different things that they would do, and they would eat bitter herbs, and they would eat all these gross things, and they'd eat some good things, but there was a story that went with all of it. It was all to remind them, right, of what God had done and where he had taken them and what he's going to do, and to point towards Jesus. And they'd go through all these things every time, and they'd discuss what it was, and they'd go through it. But there was a couple of things in there that they really had very little idea what they were for. They couldn't describe or explain the meaning behind them because it hadn't been revealed. All they knew is that God said to do it like this. And the first one was the bread. And this really became the first communion service, which we just did together, right? And there's a point in that meal where they come and they have a bag called the one bag, go figure, and there are 3 sections in this bag. And in each section is a flat piece of bread, right? And what they would do is they would pull it out and they would reach in and they'd pull the middle one out of this particular part of the meal. And they'd reach in for the middle piece of bread and they'd break it. And then they would hide half of it. And later on in the meal, usually the kids would go find that, right, and bring it back and they would eat it together. And they'd have to come up with kind of a story as to what they thought that was. And they had a couple different variations, but none of them were really set in stone because they just had to make it up. They didn't know yet. They didn't know what that was. And so they came to that part of the meal, right? And Jesus takes out this bag that has these 3 flatbreads in it, right? That they had done over and over and over again, right? Their whole life. They probably heard different. And he reaches in and he pulls out that middle one and he breaks it in half and he says, what? He says, this. You want to know what this is? We've never known what this is. He didn't say this like this, but this is what is going on. He's like, this is me. This is my body broken for you. And they're like, what? And it didn't all click at that point. And I don't know if they went and hid it. They probably didn't because there wasn't any kids there, but the symbolism behind that, which is, by the way, why we hide Easter eggs. And kids go find them. They go out and get them and bring them, right? That's where we get that whole thing. And what the meaning behind that would be, he'd take it out and it would be broken and hidden only to come back later, right? So Jesus pulls it out. This is me broken, killed for you only to return later, only to come back 3 days later. So he eats that and they share that together. And then he gets to the cup, right? And there were 4 cups that they would drink throughout this meal. There would be 4 different cups they would drink. The first one was the cup of sanctification, the second, deliverance, the third, redemption, and finally the 4th was restoration. And so he gets to the 3rd cup, and they know what the cup is. It's the cup of redemption. And he pulls it up and he says, hey guys, this cup of redemption, this is my blood spilled for you. And he explains what the whole thing is. And what brings redemption is my blood spilled for you. This is what he shares with them. And they're like, well, that's not the script. That's not the way we do this meal. What is he talking about? And they were very confused. And then he says, what? He says, I will not drink of this again until I drink it with you in my kingdom. And what cup would that be? The cup of restoration, right? When it all comes full circle and we're restored. And so that's how the weekend began, which would have been Thursday night as they shared this meal together. And he says very clearly what those things are. But of course, they didn't get it. We wouldn't have gotten it at that time either. There's no way. So then they have this meal together, and it gets a little awkward after that. He starts talking about someone betraying him, and they all start getting nervous, and it goes on. And then they get up, and they leave, and they go to Gethsemane. Gethsemane is a little ways away. It would take them probably 45 minutes to walk there, and they have an amazing conversation as they go. And if you look at the book of John, it's like 14, 15, and 16. Those chapters kind of outline that whole discussion and that journey out there, and some great, great stuff. And so they get to the Garden of Gethsemane, and Jesus knows what's coming. Right? He knows. He's preparing himself. He's aware now of all that's going to happen, and so he goes up there and he begins to feel that weight. He begins to feel the weight of our sins starting to be pressed upon his shoulders, right? Because he knows that's the night he's going to be betrayed. That's the night he's going to be arrested and hauled off, and that the next day he would be crucified. And he knows probably the most pressing thing on him, the thing that was the most stressful, was that he knew less than 24 hours from then that God the Father was going to turn his back on him because of our sins. Right? And that's what was breaking him. And he goes to his disciples and says, guys, you got to pray for me. Stay awake and pray for me. And then he goes off a little ways away and he prays. And they have no idea what's going on. They have no clue the weight of that moment and that night. And so they fall asleep. They totally fall asleep. And he gets back up and comes over and says, guys, wake up. I really need you to pray for me. And so they get up, and who knows how long they last, but then soon enough they fall asleep again. And the evening goes on. And then Judas comes, right? Judas had left dinner a little early, and they thought that he was just going to pay for things, but really he was going to sell Jesus out. That's what he was doing. And so now he comes back and he finds them. They go up, and he leads this band of it's basically all the Jewish officials and guards in the temple, and they come up and they're going to arrest him. And they're too afraid and chicken to do it during the day because they knew that they would get in trouble for it and there'd be this uprising, so they waited until night. And so up they come, right? And then Judas, of course, you probably know the story, comes up and he betrays Jesus by kissing him on the cheek. He said to the guys, hey, the one that I kiss is the one that you want to arrest. Hey, that's Jesus, and so he does. He goes up and he kisses Jesus on the cheek. And they seize him, and a fight breaks out, right? And we have Peter pulls out his sword, and he's like, not on my watch, and he cuts off a guy's ear, and Jesus puts it back on, which is crazy. And they go on and on and on, and Jesus says, look, this has got to happen. And so they take him, and all the disciples scatter. They just run for the hills because they're terrified. And Peter kind of follows at a distance, right? So he goes on, and they take him to the high priest's house. They take him to Caiaphas' house. And there's a courtyard there. And they go into the courtyard, and it's dark, it's late at night. We don't know how much time all this happens, but we know not too long from now the sun's going to come up, because when the sun comes up, they're in that courtyard. And so they go in, and Jesus is up in the front, and they're yelling at him, and they're doing all these things, and they're trying to accuse him of different stuff. And Peter's back there basically trying to hide, and he denies that he even knows them 3 times. And so what's happening in that moment is Jesus is up front, and they're trying to get him found guilty of something. So they're lying about him. They're trying to bring all these trumped up charges, but they can't find anything that he's done wrong. They can't find anything at all that he's done wrong. And in verse 65, we pick it up right there. That moment, right? They bring him down. And he's standing there before the high priest and all the Jewish officials there. And it says, Jesus remained silent, and the high priest said to him, I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. This is the moment of truth, right? It's like enough of all this trying to get you in trouble for things that you didn't do. I'm just going to ask him straight up, is he the Messiah? And Jesus said to him, you have said so. But I tell you, from now on, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest tore his robes and said, he has uttered blasphemy. What further witness do we need? You have now heard his blasphemy. What is your judgment? And they all answered him, he deserves death. Then they spit in his face and struck him. Some slapped him, saying, prophesy to us, you Christ, who is it that hit you? So they asked him straight up, are you the Messiah? Are you the one? Are you the Son of God? And he said, in a very cryptic kind of way, very much yes. Very much yes. His answer was, you have said so, but I tell you, from now on, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. That is a reference to Daniel 7:13. You can go there if you want to. I'm not going to go read it, but that's what it is. It's a reference to Daniel 7:13, and it's this prophecy of the coming Messiah, saying he's going to come in on clouds. He's going to come in. He's going to come in glory, and Jesus is saying right there, I'm the one the Old Testament's talking about. You ask if I'm the Son of God. Yes. And this was cryptic, and they understood exactly what he was saying. He was making reference to Daniel 7, saying, I'm that guy. I'm the one they're talking about. And so he tore his robe and he said, you've all heard it. He's committed blasphemy, right? And so the blasphemy that he has committed in their eyes is that he's claiming to be God. But that's not blasphemy if you're actually God. And Jesus is actually God. And so that's where that happens, and they say, well, what do we say should happen to him? And they said immediately, he deserves death. That's the punishment. That's the standard punishment for blasphemy. And they got him. In their eyes, they got him. They caught him. And there's no escape. And to them, he was guilty. And so not long after that, the sun comes up, and they take him then before Pilate. And by the morning, he finds himself there before Pilate. And this is where we're going to pick up, and we're going to read 27, 11 through 26. And we're going to kind of zoom in here on what you would think is a small detail, but it is huge. So here he is standing before Pilate. In verse 11, now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus said, "You have said so." But when he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?" But he gave him no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. And that is a reference to the prophecy in Isaiah 53:7, where he says, like a lamb is led to the slaughter, he's silent before the shearers, right? The lamb is led right to the slaughter and he remains silent. And that was written in Isaiah about 700 years before Jesus was ever born. And here we are, the lamb standing before, being brought right in to the slaughter. And he's silent to those charges, and the governor Pilate is amazed. Verse 15, now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to release for the crowd any one prisoner whom they wanted. And they had then a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when they had gathered, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" For he knew that it was out of envy they had delivered him up. He knew that he was innocent. He saw what was going on. He knew that the high priest and this council and these guys, the chief priests, were jealous. They're going to lose their power if this guy is who he says he is. And he sees all this and he says, "Who do you want me to deliver up?" Because he knew that they were envious. Verse 19, besides, while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him. And she said, "Have nothing to do with the righteous man, for I have suffered much because of him today in a dream." Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to destroy Jesus. The governor again said to them, "Which of the two do you want me to release for you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "Then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ?" They all said, "Let him be crucified." And he said, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Let him be crucified." It was a mob. It was an angry mob. They just started screaming, "Kill him." They weren't thinking for themselves. The high priests and the chief priests and all these guys were just going around and they're saying, "Hey, let's get him, guys, let's get him," and just inciting this mob. Verse 24, so when Pilate saw that he was gaining nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourself." And all the people answered, this is a little crazy. All the people answered, "His blood be on us and our children." They had no idea what they were saying. I say, "Let his blood be on me and my children." They had no idea what they were saying. Then they released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, they delivered him up to be crucified. All right, so this scene is insane. So they had brought him in. He'd been arrested, right? Here he is before Pilate. And it's this whole mockery of a trial. And Pilate's trying to figure a way to get him off. How do I get this guy to be free? And there's this tradition that during the Passover, they would release one Jewish prisoner to kind of keep the peace, to kind of appease them, to kind of, we don't know exactly where this whole thing started, but it had been going on for a while. We know why they did it. And so here he is, and he's like, all right, so we've got Barabbas and we've got Jesus. Surely they're not going to want Barabbas back. But that's what they did. They all shouted for Barabbas. Now, who is Barabbas? I want us to put ourselves in Barabbas' shoes for a second, right? Remember that feeling that we have where we're like, oh man, I'm kind of half afraid and half relieved that I escaped death, right? Hold on to that. So here's Barabbas. We don't know a whole lot about him, but what we do know is pretty important. He was a murderer and a thief, and he was arrested for insurrection, which means inciting an uprising against the government, right? That was what his main crime was. And in this uprising, he had murdered people. And he was a thief, he was a scoundrel, there was nothing good about him. But his main crime was starting this uprising against the government, which is a capital offense for which there can be no pardon, right? He is guilty, everyone knows he's guilty, and there's no escape. That is Barabbas. He is the epitome of wrong, of sin, even in the eyes of the Jews and in the eyes of the Romans. There's nothing good about him, and that's what he is in there for, a capital offense that he cannot be pardoned for. Put yourself in those shoes. There you are. You're in a cell. I don't know how long he was in the cell, but he's there in prison, and his cross is already waiting for him, right? Pilate probably said, hey, get the crosses ready. There's 3 people they were going to crucify. It was probably 2 days prior to that. So the cross was already prepared, and he's sitting in there, and he knows the next day, I'm going to be crucified. And no one's going to come rescue him. No one's going to come save him. No amount of his own power is going to get him out of it, right? There's no escape from this. It is completely hopeless. Aside from divine intervention, he's done for. He's absolutely done for. I try to kind of put myself in that setting, and there's just an oppression. It's like, it gets claustrophobic when you think of it like that. And that's the boat that he is in. That's the boat that he is in. And there is no coincidence. It is no coincidence that Barabbas is here on that day and that Passover. He wasn't arrested 3 weeks prior. He wasn't arrested the week after. But for that day, there he was. It's no coincidence that this guy is in prison. And it's no coincidence that this ridiculous custom of releasing a prisoner is going on. It was all designed for this Passover, for this moment. It was designed sovereignly by God, who knows when, in order for him to scream something at us here throughout history. And there he is. There he is in prison. No coincidence that all this is going on. And Jesus comes into town, Barabbas' cross already prepared, right? And then Jesus is arrested. He's like, what do I do with this guy? How do I get him out? Tries to convince them to take Jesus, but they say, no, we want Barabbas. He says, what do you want me to do with Jesus? And they start shouting, crucify him. Crucify him. And so they did. And here's the thing. Barabbas could not be crucified that day because someone else was on his cross. There was someone else on his cross. He can't be crucified. Jesus literally took his place. Like historically, literally took his place. And all of that happened, and that story is in here. It's in all 4 of the Gospels, and there's not many things that are in all 4 of the Gospels, and this is in all 4 of them. And it happened so that God could scream through all of history to every one of us, Jesus took your place. Guys, we are Barabbas. We are Barabbas. We're in this story, man, and we are Barabbas. We are guilty. We are guilty, and we know it. You can pretend you're not guilty. You can get mad that I said you're guilty. I've done that before. I've been mad that I said I was guilty. We can do that, but it is still true. We still stand guilty. And everybody knows it. And there can be no pardon for us outside of divine intervention, right? No amount of our own strength. It's not who we know or how much money we have or what pull we to get us out of this death sentence, right? We need divine intervention. We need Jesus to come in and to take our place on the cross. And that's what happens here. And God screams throughout history, Jesus took your place. Jesus took your place. This is Barabbas' role right here. This is his role to show us, man, we are in this story. We are represented by Barabbas. We're guilty without hope unless someone takes our place. And someone took our place. He took our place. And sure enough, he was crucified. And he was dead. He didn't swoon. He wasn't passed out. He was dead. To prove it, they shoved a spear up into his lungs, and blood and water both came out, showing that he had a heart attack. There was no way out of this. He was dead. They pulled him down and buried him. And darkness fell. Darkness fell, and there was a depression that had to have sunk in on the disciples that had no idea. He had told them that he's coming back, but they did not get it. And he came back 3 days later. He came back 3 days later. Now here's the thing. I have no idea what Barabbas was thinking. I have no clue what was going through his mind when they pulled him out a little bit early. I don't know what he was thinking. I don't know after this is all over if he put his faith in Christ, if he asked questions. I don't know if he just went back to murdering people, and I don't know if he got arrested again the next. I have no idea. But I have to think at that moment, right, when the chains fell off of his wrists, and he looked over at Jesus, and they said, "You're free." As he walked away, he had to have a moment of, what in the world was that? Did that just happen? Did that really just happen? Did I just come that close to that fate? Did I just cheat death? And I've been there. That feeling of, man, what was that? And again, I don't know what he thought. I don't even really care what he thought. But I want us to put ourselves in his shoes and think about that. I'm going to ask Tony and Sarah and the rest of the band to come on up. And we're going to continue in worship. And it's going to be good. It's going to be good. I want us to think about that. What is our response, right? Jesus took our place on the cross just as much as he took Barabbas's. And Barabbas is in that story, guys, to show us all throughout history. God just screams that Jesus took your place. Jesus took your place. And I think when we look at this story, and we look at just all these stories that we've seen a million times, we kind of just think, oh yeah, that's history, and that's nice, and that's fine. But this is a true story. This is a true story. Barabbas was a real guy. And we can read about him in things other than the Bible. He's a historical figure. And he was really set to be crucified that day, and he didn't. He didn't get crucified because somebody else was on his cross.